Welcome, listeners. Tonight, we're going to step inside the mind. What if I told you that your memories might be lying to you? What if a familiar face suddenly felt wrong? As if someone you love had been replaced by an exact copy? What if your own mind could split in two and argue with itself? In this collection, the mysteries aren't buried in oceans or carved into stone. They're alive inside us. We'll wander through the strange science of false memories and déjà vu, the illusions that trick our senses, and the moments when belief alone can heal a wound. We'll meet the explorers who entered their own minds through experiments, accidents, and quiet hallucinations, and came back unsure of what was real. And at the edges of all this, we'll find dreamers chasing the impossible, machines that never stop moving, ideas that refuse to rest. Because sometimes the most puzzling landscapes aren't places at all. They're thoughts, echoing behind your eyes, rewriting themselves as you listen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what was the last thing you remember before sleep pulled you under. Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A crowded aisle, a familiar box, a word you would have sworn had an extra letter, a line from a film you can recite by heart until you play it back and hear it spoken differently. That small jolt, ordinary life slipping a fraction out of alignment, is where tonight's story begins. This is the Mandela Effect, memory's collective glitch. The name came in the late 2000s, when a writer and conference speaker named Fiona Broome compared notes with strangers at a pop culture gathering. Many in the group remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, and some even pictured a televised funeral. But Nelson Mandela was released in 1990, elected in 1994, and died decades later in 2013. Broome set up a website and began collecting other examples, momentary dissonances that seemed to repeat across people who had never met. Lists formed, news stories followed, the phrase stuck. To understand why it took hold, it helps to start with what memory is and is not. For more than half a century, psychologists have shown that memory does not play back like a recording. It rebuilds. Each time we remember, we assemble a story, a face, a place, a logo, a line of dialogue. Most of the time, that process serves us well, but suggestions can tilt it. Word choice can bend it. Show people a car crash in a film, ask how fast the cars were going, and the verbs you use, hit or smashed, will alter not only speed estimates, but also whether people recall seeing broken glass that was never there. Plant a doctored photograph of a childhood hot air balloon ride among real family pictures, and many will remember the ride in vivid detail, even though it never happened. Memory is a builder, and builders under pressure sometimes smooth the edges and fill the gaps. The Mandela Effect gathers the moments when this smoothing happens in chorus. Consider the children's books about a family of bears written by Stan and Jan Berenstain. Many adults will swear that the name ends in Stein, as in a German surname. Yet the original paperbacks from the early 1960s onward read Berenstain, with an A before the I. Old catalogs, the family's signatures, and interviews confirm it. Still, the mind is tempted by patterns it knows. Stein is familiar. Stain on a book cover looks like a mistake that someone must have made. The Monopoly board has a face you know well. A man in a top hat with a round nose and a mustache. In many people's minds, he wears a monocle. He does not. Official artwork, old boxes, and early rule sheets keep his eyes unobstructed. So where does the monocle come from? The brain reaches for nearby shapes. Mr. Peanut wears one. Stock cartoons of bankers often do. Parodies add the glass to telegraph wealth in a single stroke, and the parody sticks. Open a drawer and pull out a t-shirt tag from Fruit of the Loom, the clothing brand with a cluster of grapes, an apple, and leaves. A large number of people remember a cornucopia behind the fruit, a wicker horn cradling the pile. The horn never existed in the company's official marks. You can trace the fruit back through old advertising art and packaging. The arrangement changes a little over the decades, but no horn appears. The mind supplies one anyway. Harvest images in school posters and holiday clip art often pair fruit with a cornucopia, so the association feels natural. Once you believe you saw it, the belief helps create the memory of seeing it again and again. There is the well-known line from the 1980 space fantasy film when the masked villain delivers a crushing truth to a young hero. Many quote it as, "Luke, I am your father." The actual line is, "No, I am your father." The misquote has the rhythm of a confession and carries the name, which helps it travel alone, without context. Sketch shows and commercials repeated the wrong version for years. The wrong line became the louder imprint. There is the genie movie that never was. In memory, a comedian known by a single name plays a genie in a 90s family comedy often called Shazam. People describe a video box, scenes, even plot twists. The trouble is, there is no such film. Another movie exists, Kazam, starring a basketball legend, released in 1996, and the comedian once hosted a television marathon of older Arabian Nights movies and wore a turban for a costume segment. Years later, he filmed a short comedy sketch that pretended the genie film had been real, feeding the loop. The pieces fit in the mind without a seam. Some examples rest on small phonetic slips or typography. The air freshener on supermarket shelves is Febreze, with a single E in the middle, not Febreze. The little chocolate bar is Kit Kat, without a hyphen, though the packaging layout suggests a break. Sex and the City can be heard as Sex in the City because the word and drops away in fast speech. The sandwich brand is Oscar Mayer with an A, but Meyer is a more common spelling in many neighborhoods. The Disney version of Snow White does not say mirror, mirror on the wall, but magic mirror on the wall, which feels wrong only because later tellings polished the alliteration until it gleamed. Geography contributes its own surprises. People express shock to learn that New Zealand sits well to the southeast of Australia on most globes, not directly to the east. Classroom wall maps leave it off by accident. Different map projections stretch and compress. Over years, the mind holds onto a triangle of land near Australia and lets its edges drift. music does it too. The stadium anthem, "We Are the Champions," often ends in memory with the phrase, "of the world," shouted proudly. On the original studio recording, the song closes without those three words. Concert versions, and the way crowds sing along, push the phrase into the finale until it feels definitive. You can test some of these claims yourself. Search old library catalogs for early Berenstain entries. Watch the scene where the villain speaks to the hero. Look up photographs of board game boxes from the 1940s onward. Examine vintage Fruit of the Loom advertisements. The paper trail holds. So why do so many remember the same wrong details? Here, the theories divide. The first and most supported path points to the mechanics of memory and the pressure of groups. When many people try to remember the same item, like a logo seen in childhood, their minds use similar shortcuts. We recall the gist, the wealth of the game banker, the Thanksgiving horn paired with fruit, the smoothness of mirror, mirror. These are not random mistakes. They are structured by expectation, and social cues reinforce them. In experiments where people compare notes after viewing a scene, their accounts drift toward each other. A confident voice often leads. Online, repetition magnifies this effect. See a wrong version presented many times with sincere certainty, and your own recall may quietly adjust to match. Recent psychology studies have tested this in a direct way. Show large groups three nearly identical versions of a famous icon, only one of which is true, and ask them to pick. For several symbols, most people favor the same wrong variant. The monocle that never was, the black tip on a cartoon character's yellow tail that never existed, a cornucopia behind a brand's fruit that was never there. In other words, the errors are shared. That does not mean an alternate reality whispers in our ear. It means that our minds, taught by the same images and stories, take the same shortcuts under low light. Design and commerce supply another layer. Brands update, fonts tighten, packaging shifts. Even when a logo's core stays constant, the world around it changes, and in the shuffle, small details misfile. A thin hyphen disappears in one line of advertising and never returns. A cursive A looks like an E on a faded paperback. A radio announcer slurs "and" in a title that the ear renders as "in." There are more adventurous explanations. Some people suggest that a fraction of us moved from one timeline to another, carrying memories from a near twin of our world. Others picture a simulation, a machine that sometimes loads the wrong artwork or swaps a detail in the corner of the frame, and we are catching the seams. A few propose that corporations quietly edit the past, adjusting logos and text in online databases without announcement. These ideas have energy, partly because the feeling of certainty is so strong. You are not daydreaming when you reach for the cornucopia behind the fruit. You are touching a memory that feels hard and bright. But official archives work against these claims. Independent scans of old packaging, photographs taken long before the internet, and physical books printed in the 1960s and 70s anchor the details. They do not flicker. And memory science keeps returning to the same finding. The confidence you feel about a memory does not predict its accuracy. The brain is a faithful narrator until it has to choose between faithfulness and a smooth story. Then it chooses smooth. There are rare, small twists that keep the story interesting. A handful of library entries did mistakenly catalog the Berenstain books under Berenstein, which spread the misspelling to parents searching for titles. Some early fan art did add a cornucopia behind Fruit of the Loom's fruit and circulated in schoolrooms. Parodies of the space fantasy scene leaned on Luke to carry the joke, which made the wrong line easier to quote without context. A comedian's stage name sat so close to a real genie movie that video stores and late-night cable schedules blurred into one. None of that makes anyone careless or gullible. It marks how culture and memory braid together in ordinary life. If you prefer a single chain of events to hold on to, follow this. A real detail lives in the world. A logo, a line, a map shape. You notice it, but the moment is brief. Years pass, you see parodies, stylizations, or reprints that edit the detail for clarity or humor. Your brain files the edit, and the original fades. You meet others who share your edited version, and the group grants it legitimacy. Then one day, you look closely again. The lens sharpens. A page spells it with an A, not an E. A famous line sounds different when spoken slowly. Your certainty and the new fact collide. The impact is the Mandela Effect. Near the end of a story like this, people sometimes ask if the entire category is itself a fiction, an internet curio dressed as a phenomenon. It matters to say this carefully. The examples are real as experiences. People truly report them, and the patterns are not random. But the weight of evidence points toward the way memory builds, not toward swapped timelines or cosmic hiccups. That said, the pull of the phrase, the sense that we are all catching a shared glitch, captures something honest about how culture works now. We do remember together. We misremember together. Imagine a quiet evening and a shelf of old paperbacks. The spines are a little sun-faded. You reach for one you have not held since school. Your hand pauses on the name. It is spelled the way it has always been spelled, and yet your mind shows you another version. The one that lived in your head for years. The one your friends might still swear is correct. You put the book back. Somewhere, a radio plays a song that ends sooner than you expected. The world, for a second, feels like a photograph that has been gently retouched. Nothing sinister. Just the reminder that memory is a craftsman working with soft clay. And sometimes the fingerprints of everyone you have ever spoken with are left in the shape. Sometimes the strangest events happen in the quietest moments. You walk into a room, reach for a light switch, and a calm certainty arrives. You have been here before. Not in a vague way, but with the crisp outline of memory. Then it fades, like mist under sunlight, and the day goes on. This is the déjà vu paradox, when the brain repeats time. In the late 1800s, a French philosopher named Émile Boirac gave this feeling its name. He described a sudden sense that the present had already been lived. Physicians and psychologists took note. By the early 20th century, laboratory minds were collecting accounts and trying to map the experience to the machinery of memory. The language grew around it. Some spoke of déjà vécu, meaning already lived. Others used déjà visité, the sense of having been in a place before. Still others noted déjà senti, a feeling recalled rather than a scene. The labels helped because the feeling itself was slippery. It arrived without warning, lasted a few heartbeats, and left almost no residue beyond curiosity. What we do know is steady. Most people report it at least once. It tends to be more common in younger adults and often appears when a person is tired, stressed, or traveling. It's stronger in unfamiliar places, a new city street that feels like home for a blink, and curiously rare in childhood. These patterns came from surveys collected over decades, compiled by careful reviewers who were less interested in romance and more in frequency and trigger. One feature keeps returning in the reports: an uncanny confidence paired with uncertainty. You feel you could predict what happens next because you feel you have already seen it. You rarely can. That mismatch, confidence without detail, is a clue. To trace the edges of the mystery, it helps to look at three kinds of evidence: quiet, everyday moments, clinical cases under a doctor's watch, and laboratory attempts to coax the feeling on command. Begin with the ordinary. A commuter waits at a cafe for an early train. It is a gray morning. The barista calls a name. A spoon taps a ceramic cup. The commuter turns toward the sound, and suddenly, everything along the counter fits into place as if recaptured from memory. The direction of the steam, the pattern on a scarf, the crooked spoon left on the saucer, all seem known. The commuter tries to chase it, thinking, "Where have I seen this?" Nothing comes. The next second, the spell is over. The scene is only a scene again. The moment leaves an aftertaste of wonder. These are the accounts that fill notebooks and surveys. Small, startling pauses in normal days. Clinical cases sharpen the picture. In the middle of the 20th century, a neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield operated on patients with seizures while the patients were awake. When he gently stimulated parts of the temporal lobes, the regions near the ears that help form memories, some patients reported a powerful familiarity, sometimes complete with vivid recall. Later teams found the same pattern in a more focused way. Touch an area just in front of the hippocampus, the brain's memory hub, and people say, "I have been here before," even when they know that cannot be true. In others, seizures that begin in this region bring déjà vu as a warning sign, an aura that arrives seconds before the main event. These observations do not solve the mystery, but they mark its territory. Whatever déjà vu is in healthy people, a harmless quirk, a brief misfire, a prediction engine going a bit too far, it speaks the language of memory systems. Laboratories have tried to summon déjà vu without surgery, and sometimes they succeed. One method uses spaces that echo each other. A person explores a virtual house, a set of rooms laid out in a certain shape. Later, they enter a different house, but with the same structure turned 90 degrees and covered in new textures and furniture. Many report that uncanny tug. I know this place. They can't say why. When asked if they can predict what's around the next corner, some say yes. Their confidence spikes. Their guesses are no better than chance. The feeling is real. The content is not. Another method uses suggestion. In a small study, researchers primed volunteers with the idea that upcoming lists or tasks would feel familiar. Many later reported strong déjà vu, even when nothing had been repeated. Brain imaging with these designs hints at a pattern. Deeper memory regions whisper familiar, while parts of the frontal lobe, the brain's fact checker, remain active, resisting the slide into false memory. The result is a mental stance that feels like recognition, but does not settle into belief. There are rarer threads. A handful of medical reports describe persistent déjà vu in people taking certain cold and flu medications or drugs that alter dopamine, a chemical that shapes learning and motivation. In these cases, the feeling could last minutes or hours and repeat over days, then stop when the medicine was withdrawn. Dementia can bring a heavier form called déjà vécu, where a person is convinced entire days were already lived and therefore not worth attention. And there is the mirror image, jamais vu. In one playful experiment, volunteers were asked to write a common word over and over, door, door, door. After a short while, a surprising number said the word looked unfamiliar and meaningless. The brain's sense of familiarity, it seems, can slip both ways. So what might be happening in those seconds when the present feels like a rerun? The oldest suggestion is also the simplest. A perception is processed twice with a small delay, and the second pass feels like memory. A moving eye blinks, attention shifts, and the brain briefly treats a fresh scene as a remembered one. It is an elegant idea, and many people nod when they hear it. The problem is that a split-second delay alone does not explain the depth of the feeling, or why it clusters in unfamiliar places rather than familiar ones. An ordinary blink is common. A convincing déjà vu is not. A stronger angle points to the way memory has two modes: familiarity and recollection. Familiarity is quick and vague, a doorway you think you've seen. Recollection is slower and detailed when you can say the day, the person, the reason. The deeper parts of the temporal lobe specialize in that quick signal of, I know this, while the hippocampus binds details and context. If the fast channel and the slow channel fall out of phase, the fast signal fires without a match from the slower system, you could get what many describe: the certainty of knowing without any content to back it up. Brain stimulation studies, seizure auras, and the virtual house experiments all tilt in this direction. Even the frontal lobe's role fits. When the fact-checking parts of the brain stay engaged, they can keep the feeling from hardening into a false memory. You get mystery without delusion. Another line of thought involves pattern resemblance. The mind is good at capturing the overall shape of a scene. Even when the details are new, the layout can echo something stored long ago. Two hallways at right angles, a spiral stair to the left, a window throwing shadows in a familiar grid. When the shape matches, the familiarity system lights up. The content feels known even in a new environment. This is the logic behind those virtual spaces that trick the mind. Same skeleton, different skin. There is also predictive coding, a modern term for a simple habit. The brain is always guessing, then checking what arrives. When a guess fits snugly, the match can feel like, I knew it. Even if the knowledge was a moment-old prediction, not a memory. Some déjà vu may be that, forecasting mistaken for recalling. Finally, there is the seizure hypothesis. In people with temporal lobe epilepsy, déjà vu can herald an episode. In others, a brief, harmless burst of activity in the same circuits could be enough to create the feeling by itself. That would explain why stress, lack of sleep, and overstimulation, all known to nudge the brain into odd rhythms, often precede déjà vu in healthy people. It would also account for those rare cases where medication that tweaks brain chemistry can trigger repeated episodes. What these ideas share is an assumption that matters. Déjà vu does not require a previous life or a tear in time. It is a natural product of a nervous system that trades in predictions and pattern matches, usually useful, sometimes misled. That does not make the experience less strange. It anchors it. There are questions left on the table. Why is déjà vu most commonly reported in younger adults, then tapering with age? Perhaps the freshness of experience makes pattern matching more likely to misfire, or perhaps older adults are slower to label the feeling. Why do some people feel it in clusters, many times in a season, then not again for years? The answer may lie in sleep, stress, travel, and the overall tempo of life. But no single factor has been decisive on its own. And why does the feeling of prediction sit inside déjà vu so stubbornly when, in experiments, it rarely yields true foresight? The front of the brain may be doing more behind the scenes than we can measure, permitting the emotion of certainty while withholding a verdict. A late note for completeness. Because the sensation is so slippery and so easy to describe, it invites larger stories. Some traditions frame déjà vu as a glimpse of a life already lived. Others see it as a signal from outside the ordinary chain of time. These ideas are enduring and meaningful for many. In the small world of evidence, though, the weight falls on memory and perception. The brain can create a strong feeling of already known without any actual memory to support it. Laboratory work shows how. Clinical work shows where. Everyday life shows how often. If you prefer a chain of events to hold, consider this one. You enter a place with a shape that echoes something you have seen before. Your attention is divided by a thought or a sound, so the scene arrives in two sweeps. Deep memory regions flag the shape as familiar. The hippocampus does not find a match and offers no detail. The front of the brain keeps you anchored, refusing to invent a past to satisfy the feeling. For a breath or two, confidence leads and knowledge follows behind, and in that gap, you feel time repeat. Then the systems settle, the moment loosens, and the day continues. It will likely happen again. A hallway will bend just so. A voice will carry a rhythm you recognize without knowing why. A sunlit pattern on a floor will tug at you with quiet authority. When it does, you can let the paradox stand. A present that feels remembered. A memory without a story attached. The brain briefly showing you how it guesses the world before it knows it. Paris, 1923. A second-floor office on a quiet street. A doctor's notebook open. A woman sitting very still. She says her husband has been replaced. Not killed, not kidnapped, but swapped for a flawless double who looks and speaks exactly as before. The physician listens. He will write about her case, and the name will travel. The Capgras delusion, when familiar faces turn strange. The first report came from a French psychiatrist, Joseph Capgras, who described a patient often called Madame M. She insisted that those closest to her had been taken away and replaced by imposters, not once but many times. To her, the evidence was in the feeling. The face was correct, the voice fit, yet the certainty of the person she loved was gone. She adjusted the rest of the world to match that gap. A century later, the pattern still appears in clinics and in homes. It can emerge after a head injury, with certain types of dementia, during a spell of severe psychosis, or around the birth of a child, when sleep and hormones are in sharp flux. It can be narrow, centered on a single person, or it can spread to include animals, places, even possessions. A patient might say their cat is a copy, or the house is a replica placed overnight. The common thread is not the look of things, it is the feeling of them. Clinicians learn to watch for a small paradox that helps anchor the mystery. A man who swears his wife is an imposter will often recognize her voice over the phone with no problem. In person, the sight of her face makes him wary. Heard through a receiver, the rhythm of her speech unlocks trust. The same person, two routes in, two different results. Doctors noted the times when this paradox held. They also logged the cases where it failed, because in a few patients the belief extended to voices too, or to photographs alone, or to video calls but not to face-to-face meetings. The edges shift from case to case, but the core feels the same. Recognition at the level of sight, mistrust at the level of feeling. There is a pattern in the body as well, as if the nervous system leaves a small breadcrumb trail. In quiet tests, a person is shown pictures of strangers and of loved ones, while a simple sensor measures tiny changes in skin moisture. Most of us show a faint, automatic jump when we see someone dear. It is not a choice. It is a quick, bodily acknowledgement. Many people with Capgras do not show that rise. The eyes say, "I know this face." The body stays neutral. In other words, the pathway that supplies warmth and attachment is not joining the pathway that supplies recognition. That split does not explain everything. Some patients do show the response, but it fits more than a few. Behind the scenes, the brain uses a set of roots to build a person from a glance. On the underside of the temporal lobe, areas specialize in faces, mapping the shapes of eyes and cheekbones into something known. From there, signals run to deeper regions that supply context and emotion, including a small structure that helps tag faces with significance: safe, dangerous, beloved, unknown. When the lines between recognition and feeling are cut or frayed, the result can be uncanny familiarity without resonance. The mind, built to make sense, then chooses a story that accounts for this mismatch. If your partner looks right but feels wrong, imposter is one way to square the books. This is not the only way misrecognition works. There is another condition, face blindness, where people cannot recognize faces even when they belong to those they see every day. In that case, the person may still show that automatic bodily response to a loved one, even while insisting they do not know who they are looking at. Capgras seems like a mirror image, recognition without the warm response, and belief bending to that absence. The timeline of an episode often follows stressors. A teacher in her 30s is struck by a driver who runs a red light. She is dazed but walks away. A month later, she comes home from work, and as her partner sets down his keys, a flatness moves in. His face looks correct, but something in its presence is wrong, as if the person wearing it had no shared past with her. She checks photographs. She asks him to name the neighbors. He answers without hesitation. She decides he is a double. The belief intensifies at night and loosens by morning. A brain scan later shows a small bruise deep in the right frontal lobe and faint changes along the track that carries visual signals toward the brain's emotional center. None of these findings are dramatic. Together, they outline a fault line. Another family writes in a diary because the story is hard to repeat out loud. A retired engineer with subtle early memory loss wakes from a nap and refuses to let his daughter into the house, saying she is one of the copies. He recognizes her on the telephone. In person, he does not. His neurologist finds features of a dementia known for vivid dreams and not quite right perceptions. Medications that boost a certain messenger chemical, the same class often used to help with memory, soften the episodes. The family learns a practical routine. Announce arrivals in advance. Approach slowly. Greet from the hallway, where the voice precedes the face. The man's delusion does not vanish, but it stops ruling the room. Not every case has injury or neurodegeneration behind it. A new mother in her 20s, sleeping in fragments and hearing her child cry in every sound, begins to believe her partner is a fake who intends harm. She calls the police once, then twice. Doctors eventually treat her for a post-childbirth psychosis. With rest and guided treatment, the imposter belief recedes. For a while afterward, stressful nights bring a little echo, a feeling that flickers and goes, not strong enough to harden into certainty. The explanations available fall into a few groups. The first, and most widely cited, is the disconnection idea. In this view, the visual recognition system is intact, but the bridge to emotional salience is damaged. because the emotional tone is missing, the brain flags a mismatch. This looks like my partner, but it does not feel like my partner. The mind then supplies a narrative that accounts for that alarm. It is not a weak imagination. It is a strong one pressed into service. A second idea focuses on how the brain handles surprise. The nervous system predicts what is about to happen and compares the result to the expectation. When the error signal is high and the circuits that check beliefs are under strain, after injury, with illness, or in a storm of stress hormones, the brain may accept a peculiar explanation rather than let uncertainty stand. In that frame, dopamine, a chemical tied to learning from surprise, is often a supporting actor. When its signaling goes off course, the sense of what fits and what does not can slide. A third approach looks at the front of the brain, where we weigh evidence and test our own thoughts. Even if the face-to-feeling link falters, a sturdy belief-checking system can keep odd notions in the "that was strange" column. If the checking system is compromised, an unusual feeling can migrate into conviction. This helps clarify why some patients have many unusual perceptions but do not form fixed delusions, while others, exposed to the same perceptions, organize their lives around them. There are also details that do not fit neatly. Some patients extend the delusion to voices, which challenges the clean split between sight and sound. Others misidentify pets or children rather than partners. A few report duplicate towns, roads that look right but belong to a counterfeit city placed by unknown agents. In dementia, the mix can change from week to week, with the season, with the hour. Clinicians also note that imposter beliefs can appear alongside other fixed ideas, such as the sense that a familiar stranger is actually a known person in disguise, a different pattern with the same root in misrouted recognition and belief. Treatment, when it comes, is often a blend rather than a cure. If a seizure disorder is uncovered, controlling the seizures can reduce the delusions. If memory disease is present, medications that support communication between neurons may soften the edges. In psychosis without injury, antipsychotic medicine can help price down the intensity, while structured therapy builds a habit of checking rather than assuming. Families create simple protocols. Announce, approach from the side the patient trusts, use the voice first, keep lighting steady, reduce mirrors at night when reflections can confuse a tired mind. All of this moves the story away from fear and toward a kind of quiet detective work. It asks, what broke, where, and how do we work around it while it heals, if it will? It also invites a wider question about what it means to know someone. Recognition, it turns out, is not a single thing. It is a handshake between sight and feeling, between stored facts and the body's yes. If that handshake fails, the mind will try to make a new agreement. Consider a chain of events that could thread a typical case. A person takes a blow to the head, small enough to miss on the first scan, but deep enough to disturb connections between face recognition and the circuits that marks. The pill should have been nothing. A chalk circle, a sip of water, a moment of reassurance, and then the day continues. Instead, pain eases. Nausea fades, a tremor loosens its hold. No active drug, no surgery that cuts or scrapes, no chemical force at work. Yet the body responds. Tonight's story is the placebo effect, the mind that heals itself. Begin with a scene that doctors still tell each other. It is the winter of the early 1940s. A crowded field hospital near a shoreline. Wounded soldiers arriving faster than the morphine can be found. A nurse, calm and steady, fills a syringe with salt water and tells a soldier he is receiving a strong painkiller. He relaxes, the surgeon is able to operate. Years later, the physician Henry Beecher will publish an account claiming that belief can act as strong medicine. He will call it powerful. Decades after that, others will pick apart his numbers and say he overstated the case. But the core observation, that expectation can bend experience, has only grown clearer. The word itself is older. In the 19th century, a placebo was a doctor's polite euphemism for something given to please a patient rather than to treat a disease. It was a nod to bedside manner as much as biology. The modern version is more precise and more interesting. The placebo effect is the change that occurs when ritual, context, and expectation make the body behave as if an active drug were present. The effect shows up most clearly in pain, nausea, itch, fatigue, and mood. The symptoms the nervous system weighs and paints for us, and far less in things the body measures for itself, like a growing tumor or a broken bone. Once you look for it, the record fills with careful experiments. In a Department of Veterans Affairs hospital in Houston in the early 2000s, a surgeon named Bruce Moseley divided patients with worn, painful knees into 3 groups. One group received the usual cleaning and trimming of rough cartilage. One group received a washout. The third group received only small skin incisions and the sound and motion of surgery. They were stitched and wheeled to recovery. 2 years later, on walking tests and stair climbing, the sham group reported improvement equal to the groups that had undergone the full operation. It did not grow new cartilage. It did not reverse the underlying joint damage. But the experience of pain and function changed. Around the same time, dentists working with patients during tooth extraction ran a neat test. They told some patients they would receive a strong painkiller. Some did. Others received a look-alike inert injection. Many of the patients with the inert injection reported real pain relief. Then the researchers added a twist. They gave some patients a second injection, a drug called naloxone that blocks the body's own painkillers. In those patients, the relief vanished. The sham pain relief had been carried, at least in part, by the body's own opioid system. Expectation had turned a tap in the brain and released a known chemistry. In asthma, the contrast is sharp. Volunteers inhaled a substance that feels like a rescue medication but is inert. Many reported easier breathing. They relaxed, their shoulders softened, their faces eased. Then a simple tool measured airflow in and out of the lungs. The numbers did not change. The feeling improved. The airway's narrowness did not. That split Subjective relief without objective shift is a steady pattern in the placebo story. The same applies to migraine. In one experiment, people with frequent migraines took a pill during an attack. Sometimes it was the active medicine, sometimes a lookalike, sometimes the active medicine labeled as a placebo, sometimes a placebo labeled as the medicine. Labels mattered. The expectation leaning over the pill added effect, even when the words on the packet were not accurate. The largest benefit still came from the real drug, but a labeled placebo was not nothing. There are subtler threads. The shape and color of a pill change its impact. Bright red or orange pills are felt as stronger, often associated with stimulation. Blue tends to be calming, except in places where blue carries a different cultural meaning. Two pills feel stronger than one. A capsule feels stronger than a tablet. An injection overpowers them both. Brand names add weight. So do white coats and quiet confidence. Even price, when suggested, can sway experience. In a study of pain responses, an inert pill described as expensive outperformed the same inert pill described as discounted. The opposite of the placebo effect has its own shadow. A nocebo response is harm born of expectation. When a doctor warns of a side effect in a vivid way, more patients report it. When a group hears that a village's water is tainted, a wave of stomach aches follows even when the water tests clean. In back pain clinics, telling patients that back pain is a sign of fragility and long-term danger leads to worse outcomes than telling them it is uncomfortable but manageable with movement and time. The question behind all of this is simple. How does belief get into the body? The answers we have are plain, even if the full map is still being drawn. The first explanation is expectation, which is not a mood, but a prediction engine. The nervous system forecasts what is about to happen and adjusts on the fly. If you anticipate relief, pain systems often damp down. In the dentist study, blocking the brain's own opioids cut off that dampening. Other work hints at similar shifts in the body's natural cannabinoid system, another set of levers for pain. Brain scans using non-invasive imaging while people receive inert treatments show activity in areas known to modulate pain and perception. The brain is not pretending, it is changing how signals are weighed. A second explanation is learning. In the 1970s, a psychologist named Robert Ader noticed an odd thing. He had given rats a sweet drink paired with a drug that suppressed the immune system. Later, with only the sweet drink, the rats' immune systems dipped again. The body learned that this taste predicted suppression and responded in kind. Versions of this conditioning have appeared in people with autoimmune diseases. Under careful supervision, some patients can pair a small dose of an active immunosuppressant with a distinctive flavor or scent, then later use the flavor alone to boost the effect and reduce the drug dose. It is not a cure. It is a nudge carried by a learned link. A third piece is context, the meaning of the act. An anthropologist named Daniel Moorman proposed thinking less about placebo and more about the meaning response. A pill cannot comfort anyone. A pill that stands for help, given by someone you trust, in a room designed to soothe, can. Warmth from a clinician is not decoration. It is part of the intervention. Studies comparing hidden and open dosing show that the same drug works better when the patient is told it is arriving and feels attended to. When a painkiller is started by a silent pump with no explanation, it does less than when a clinician says, "We are giving this now. You should feel easier in a few minutes." There are fair challenges, and they matter. When you strip away soft endpoints, pain scores, nausea ratings, feelings of fatigue, and look for hard changes, the effect shrinks. Placebos do not shrink tumors, clear infections, or set a broken bone. In asthma, people feel better without measurable opening of the airways. In depression, belief and support help, but severe cases need more than a sugar pill and good talk. Henry Beecher's wartime story remains evocative, but is not a complete map. His later analysis, which suggested a large, fixed share of medical response comes from placebo, has been revised downward by more rigorous modern work. Another caution is the fragility and variability of the effect. Two people with the same condition can respond very differently. A strong early response can fade as novelty wears off. Some people, especially those with deep and continuing illness, find no relief at all from context and suggestion. You cannot talk an autoimmune flare into stopping. You can only shape the edges. And even then, not always. There is, however, a recent line of experiments that changes the ethics of this terrain. For a long time, the placebo effect was tangled up with deception. A doctor telling a patient a pill had medicine when it did not. That is not acceptable in modern care. But several groups have tried open-label placebos, where patients are told plainly, "This is an inert pill with no active drug." Sometimes taking a pill like this can cue the body's own pain relief. In irritable bowel syndrome, chronic lower back pain, and menopausal hot flashes, patients who took open-label placebos reported modest but real improvements compared with those who received no pill at all. Some of these studies are small. Replication is still underway. Yet the results are consistent enough to suggest that ritual alone can carry power without a lie. If you wanted a chain of events to explain a common placebo arc, it might look like this. A person with persistent knee pain meets a surgeon who listens well and explains a plan. The person sees the operating room, hears steady voices, feels care. In the mind, a prediction forms. Relief is coming. Pain signals leaving the knee still travel upward, but at the very first relay, they are tagged as less urgent, less threatening. The brain leans on its own chemistry to turn the volume down. The person walks a little more, breathes a little easier, sleeps longer the next week. Because movement itself helps knees, the whole system improves a notch. Nothing magical happened, and nothing false. The mind set conditions where the body could do the little it is able to do, and that little mattered. On the more mysterious side sits Parkinson's disease, a condition of diminishing dopamine. the brain's reward and movement messenger. In several studies, when people with Parkinson's are told they will receive a drug that often helps, their brains release dopamine in the very regions the disease has drained. Some show temporary improvement in movement. The improvement is not dramatic and not long-lasting, but the chemistry is visible. Expectation moves the needle, however briefly, in a system usually thought to be rigid. The detective work continues in smaller corners. Researchers have shown that telling people they slept well, even when they did not, can sharpen their performance on attention tasks the next day, compared with telling them they slept poorly. Surgeons have found that a quiet, unhurried preoperative conversation reduces the amount of anesthesia needed. Injections described as a strong painkiller work better than the same injections described as a mild pain reliever. Meaning, again, infiltrates physiology. None of this erases the need for strong treatments that do what they claim, measurable by tools and time. But it reframes the environment around those treatments as part of the work. When regulators require that new medicines outperform a dummy pill, they acknowledge two forces: the chemistry in the capsule and the mind walking alongside it. Today's clinicians are trying to fold that second force into care without deception, to prime the nervous system to help, not to trick it. There is an odd comfort in the limits here. If placebos could stop an infection or collapse a tumor, the world would be stranger and maybe crueler. Hope would be asked to do too much. Instead, the placebo effect lives where you would expect the mind's hand to reach. Pain, fatigue, nausea, itch, anxiety. These are not minor. They are a vast part of what it feels like to be unwell. The last image is simple. A person sits on the edge of a bed in a quiet clinic room. On the tray is a small white tablet. The clinician has explained what it is not, and why taking it might still help. The room is warm. The conversation was kind. The plan is clear. Most encounters are forgotten as quickly as they arrive. But now and then, something appears in the hardest hour and leaves a mark that people carry for life. An extra set of footsteps, a voice telling you to keep going, a companion you cannot see, yet cannot deny. Tonight's story is the third man factor, the companion that isn't there. The phrase has a simple origin. Early mountaineers and polar explorers, moving on little food and less sleep, began reporting the same odd thing, the sense that someone else had joined them. Not a hallucination in the theatrical sense, more like a quiet partner, just out of sight, walking near the shoulder and guiding decisions. Over time, pilots, sailors, miners, and disaster survivors would add their own accounts. The details varied, but one line held: in extreme stress, a person feels accompanied by another presence that steadies the mind. A century ago, in the Southern Ocean, 3 men climbed inland from a small boat and stepped onto a ridge no one had mapped for them. It was the last stretch of an ordeal that had already broken ships and scattered crews across ice. Ernest Shackleton, Frank Worsley, and Tom Crean set out before dawn to cross the mountains and reach a whaling station on the far side of South Georgia. The air hovered around freezing. Near 0 degrees Celsius, or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. with sleet that stung the face. They moved for roughly 36 hours without real sleep, roped together, testing slopes with the butts of their axes, sliding down one valley only to climb another. In the account Shackleton later wrote, he included a line that still draws attention. During that long and racking march, he felt that they were four, not three. He could not name the fourth, and neither could the others, but all agreed they had sensed a companion they never saw. They reached the station. The men at the boilers stared at their torn clothes and wind-burned faces, and a rescue could finally be organized. The presence faded once warmth and safety returned. A few decades later, on the highest mountain on Earth, a climber named Frank Smythe came within sight of the summit. He was alone, above the last camp, moving into thin air where every step could take a minute. The world narrowed to snow, rock, and breath. He wrote that he felt another climber alongside him, so vividly that when he stopped to eat, he broke a slab of sugary mint cake in half and held a piece out to share. No one took it. When he looked to his side, there was just wind and ice. He turned back to the slope and kept moving until prudence and weather persuaded him to descend. In the spring of 1927, a young pilot lifted his small airplane into a moonlit sky and pointed toward an ocean without landmarks. He had been awake since the night before, and the engine's drone was the only constant in a changing field of cloud, stars, and fatigue. He later wrote of presences in the cockpit, not frightening, not even surprising after a while, but deeply real. They spoke to him, calmly and firmly, and told him he would make it. The hours slid by. Land appeared. He brought the plane down in front of a waiting crowd and was lifted onto shoulders before the tiredness fully caught up. Mountaineers still tell a modern version. In the 1980s, high in the Peruvian Andes, a climber named Joe Simpson suffered a shattered leg after a fall. His partner, trying to lower him down a sheer face as a storm closed in, lost contact, and believing Joe had died in a crevasse, was forced to retreat. Joe had not died. He crawled and hopped alone across a glacier and moraine in darkness and cold that dropped well below -10 degrees Celsius, around 14 degrees Fahrenheit. In the days that followed, a voice, neither his own nor obviously someone else's, began to cut through panic and pain. It spoke in clipped, practical phrases. Move now, rest later, set your watch for 20 minutes, and then stand up again. It never argued. It never frightened him. It was a guide with a metronome's patience. He followed it all the way to his tent, where he collapsed as his partner, shocked, pulled him inside. Accounts like these are not confined to ice and altitude. Sailors alone at sea have written of a steady watchman joining them, taking the tiller through a gale, while the captain dozed for a few minutes on a wet deck. In a modern disaster, many floors off the ground, survivors who made it down described a sense that someone was there, keeping them calm, helping them choose the right stairwell, persuading them to keep moving through heat and confusion. Walk enough corridors with fluorescent lights humming, and the smell of dust and smoke in the air, and the idea of an unseen, competent companion becomes less strange. The core features repeat. The presence arrives in moments of exhaustion or danger. It does not shout, and it does not threaten. It feels protective. It often offers specific, helpful instructions, not grand speeches, just the next correct action. It fades once safety returns. Why would the mind produce such a thing? The most commonly cited explanations start with the body's chemistry and the brain's sense of self. One line of thought points to conditions that strip the brain of its usual landmarks: low oxygen at altitude, deep fatigue, hunger, cold, dehydration, prolonged isolation. Each can nudge perception from its baseline. When 2 or 3 stack up, the effect grows. Under such stress, the line between me and not me can blur at the edges. Neuroscientists studying this have used a simple trick in the lab. Blindfolded volunteers are asked to move their hand in a small circle while a machine touches their backs in the same pattern, but with a slight delay. The brain tries to match what it feels with what it expects from its own movement. That mismatch can create a felt presence, as if someone else is near, reaching out in the same rhythm. Other researchers have used mild electrical stimulation on the side of the brain that helps map the body in space. Some patients report a shadow person leaning against them when that area is nudged. These experiments are not mountains in a storm, but they sketch the mechanism, disrupt the map of self just a little, and a second figure can appear. Another explanation is more practical and, in a way, kinder. In extreme situations, the brain may split its own problem-solving voice off into a separate character because it helps. Decision-making when terrified is noisy. A calm, slightly detached guide with a firm tone can cut through that noise. Joe Simpson's voice that measured intervals and set commands is a clean example. He knew to rest and move. The voice made it executable. This fits with how our inner speech works in normal life. People talk themselves through tasks. Under pressure, that tutor might step outside by a small trick of perception. There is also a social angle. Humans are built to move and work in groups. Even at a low level, the presence of a partner changes load. Heart rate eases. Effort feels more bearable. Some psychologists suggest that the third man is the mind simulating what it most needs: a teammate. In the middle of a whiteout or a burning building, that simulation is not a luxury. It is. Skeptics ask fair questions. Many accounts are written after the fact, sometimes long after, and memory under stress is tricky. Stories get smoothed by time, and details we repeat become more solid than they were at the start. It is also hard to disentangle cultural influence. Shackleton's line traveled widely. A poet used it in a famous passage, and years later, climbers and pilots who had read those lines were moving through their own worst days. Did the idea of the third man find them because they were primed for it? Perhaps. Still, the breadth of the reports, from polar marches to airplane cockpits to city stairwells, suggests a shared human response, more than a single retold myth. Modern studies add small pieces without claiming the whole. People sitting quietly in a laboratory, asked to stay awake for long hours, begin to report presences when the room is dim and the tasks monotonous. Long-distance runners out on isolated roads sometimes feel a cyclist pace them for a few miles, steady as a metronome, and then vanish at an intersection. In hospitals, grieving spouses commonly sense their partner sitting on the edge of the bed or moving in the kitchen. Those experiences are not the same as a mountain voice giving orders, but the tint is similar, a companion that offers comfort when the mind is under load. If you wanted a likely chain of events, it might look like this. A person finds themselves beyond the normal margin of safety. They are cold and low on food, or they have breathed thin air for hours, or they have not slept since yesterday morning. The brain's inner map of where the body ends and the world begins gets fuzzy. At the same time, a clean voice is needed to cut through panic. The nervous system pulls from its own habits. The voice used to set goals, the words used to coach through hard work, and externalizes that function as a separate partner. That partner borrows the authority of a teammate or leader the person has trusted before. Once immediate danger passes and warmth, food, or company returns, the brain no longer needs the construct, and it fades. There is a final caution, and it belongs late, not early. Some third-man stories carry a glow that may come more from literature than from logs. A few cases rest only on memoir and cannot be cross-checked. That does not dissolve the core phenomenon, which appears in medical, psychological, and expedition records again and again. It simply reminds us to separate the reliable from the embellished, even as we admit that in the worst hours of a life, exact notes are rarely taken. What stays, even after the theories, is the practical kindness of the reports. The presence does not demand belief. It does not ask for worship or argument. It stands beside people when they are most alone and says, in one form or another, do this next. Walk to that light. Cross that drift. Take 20 steps and then rest. It is the mind working with the tools it has to give itself a partner when it needs one. Imagine a late road, empty fields on either side, shoes scuffing grit in a steady rhythm. You are cold, and the wind draws heat from your sleeves. Then you hear something almost ordinary. A second set of steps, half a pace behind, matching your stride without effort. You do not look back. You do not have to. You keep moving, and for a while, you are not walking alone. To the person in the chair, it begins without drama. A soft red glow through 2 half moons of plastic, a hush of distant surf in the headphones, and a room that feels removed from clocks. 5 minutes pass, then 10, then 20. The mind waits. Shapes stir at the edges. A voice seems to brush against the noise and then slip away. This is the Ganzfeld effect, seeing in the silence. The name is Old German for entire field, and it began as a straightforward observation. When your senses are smoothed into sameness, the brain does not idle, it invents. In the early 1930s, a young psychologist named Wolfgang Metzger described what happens when vision has no edges to grab onto. Subjects stared into an evenly lit field and reported drifting colors, slow pulsing waves, and, after a time, more formed images. Mountaineers knew a cruder version already from whiteouts on the snowfields. Pilots found it in cloud layers with no horizon. In a uniform field, the brain's need for contrast starts to fill the gap with its own material. Decades later, in the 1970s, researchers took this simple phenomenon into a controlled room and added a question that would make the Ganzfeld well known. If the brain was already tuned to produce its own pictures in sensory quiet, could it also notice something faint from outside the usual channels? A handful of laboratories set up trials that were as careful as their budgets and imagination allowed. A participant sat in a reclining chair. Two halves of a ping-pong ball, sanded to frost the surface, were taped over the eyes. A lamp with a deep red filter cast uniform light. Headphones played a steady wash of sound. Often an untuned radio's hiss or recorded ocean. The room was warmed enough that cool air would not sharpen attention. The person in the chair was asked to speak freely about any images, words, or feelings that arose. In a separate room, sometimes down the hall, and sometimes on a different floor, another person focused on a target, a photograph, or a short clip of moving scenes, selected at random from a small set. After about half an hour of quiet reporting from the chair, the session ended. The person who had been in the Ganzfeld room was shown 4 possibilities: the actual target and 3 decoys chosen from the same pool. Then came the core moment. Which one fit the stream of impressions best? This was not a one-off. A typical project ran dozens of sessions, measuring how often the person in the chair chose the correct image. With 4 choices, chance would sit at about 1 in 4. If the hit rate stayed around that mark, then the Ganzfeld was simply a window into the brain's talent for making something out of a blank field. If it rose above that, steadily and under control, the story might be stranger. Early results caused a stir. In some series, the hit rate hovered near 1 in 3. The words used in the reports teased at connections: a red umbrella, a splashing dog, a glass city, and then the target would turn out to be a rainy street scene, a leaping retriever, an aerial of modern buildings. Skeptical eyes turned first to the mechanics. Random selection must be real random. Rooms had to be sealed against hints. No reflections, no intercom clicks, no experimenter who unknowingly said a word at the wrong moment, and no favoritism among the 4 options. The decoys needed to be similar in feel so that the choice was not a memory test. Investigators adapted. Some groups automated target selection with preloaded sets of clips and recorded the sessions from start to finish so that no one could claim fast edits smuggled in meaning. Others built a shielded room so that the person relaxing in the chair could not hear a cough or a scrape from outside. Certain labs tried 2 variations: trials with a sender, who stared at the target and tried to push it mentally, and trials with no sender at all, where the person in the chair was told simply to notice. The time scales settled into familiar ranges. About 30 minutes in the chair, a few minutes to judge, a short break, and on to the next participant. Results over the years formed a pattern that is steady enough to describe and uneven enough to keep arguments alive. When you gather the early runs, the hit rates sometimes rise above chance, landing near 1 in 3 rather than 1 in 4. Later checks pointed out that some of those studies had small sample sizes, and a run of good luck could give the illusion of a real effect. A broad review at the end of the 1990s took many published Ganzfeld tests and pooled them. The overall rate, once flattened across labs, drifted toward chance. That would seem to close the door. Yet a later round of reviews, which filtered by stricter criteria and looked at experiments conducted under tighter controls, saw the rate creep upward again. It was not dramatic, but it was above the 1 in 4 baseline by a small, stable margin. A few consistent hints emerged about who did best. People comfortable with imagery, artists, musicians, meditators, seemed to report more detailed streams and scored higher when asked to pick the target. Experience also mattered. New participants were often uneasy. The setting was odd, the red light unblinking, the noise insistent. Come back for a second run, and the inner monologue loosened in ways that made judging easier. What exactly is happening in that chair is not an idle or mystical question. It is tied to the mechanics of perception that carry us through ordinary life. When you look at an object, your eyes do not send a clean picture upstream. They send coded differences, edges, contrasts, possible motion. The brain builds the scene. In a uniform field, those different signals fall away, and internal noise begins to count for more. Given enough time, the brain's pattern hunger will find faces and voices in a wash of color and sound, much as people see slow fireworks behind closed eyes in a dark bedroom. Prisoners in cells with no light have long reported geometric shapes and drifting figures, a phenomenon known informally as the prisoner's cinema. Radio operators in earlier decades, listening to static for hours, sometimes heard faint words resolve and then fade, clear enough to write down, wrong often enough to provoke doubt. A cautious, grounded chain of events might look like this. The room's red light makes the visual world uniform, the headphones make the sound uniform, and posture is set to keep the body quiet. The brain amplifies its own signals. Memories and impressions rise more easily. If a second person down the hall is staring at a simple target, let us say a photograph of a tugboat in fog, any mention of gray, horn notes, lights on water, or knots of rope will later feel like a match. When the person in the chair is shown that tugboat along with 3 decoys, those small overlaps feel meaningful. Over many sessions, those feelings can add up to slightly better than chance choices, especially when the decoys are not perfectly matched, and when the person judging knew, even faintly, something about what kinds of images were in the pool. Supporters of the strongest claim take a different route. They note that some labs ran under conditions designed to eliminate leaks. Targets were chosen by a machine outside anyone's control, and sessions were recorded straight through so that no one could argue a clever cue slipped in. Under these conditions, the hit rate still edged above chance by a small but persistent amount. They argue that a human receiver, placed in sensory quiet, may be able to notice something subtle from another mind or from an unknown channel in the world itself. That is not proof. It is an invitation to test. Skeptical voices ask for more and get specific about the problems. A small bias in the way decoys are chosen can nudge outcomes. If a lab uses many nature scenes and the target pool favors certain colors, participants who tend to talk about rivers and trees will do well whether or not a sender is focusing on anything. Expectation leakage is another quiet culprit. If the experimenter has any hint about the target, even a mood from watching it earlier, tone and word choice may shift without being noticed, giving the person in the chair a steering impulse. Then there is the file drawer, the unromantic fact that studies with no effect are often set aside rather than written up. When you only see what made it into print, the world looks more orderly than it is. Between those poles sits the plain Ganzfeld effect itself, the bit that does not depend on guesses about hidden channels. You can try it with household items and a careful friend. The routine details matter. The light should be bright but not harsh. The audio should be steady and broad. The room should be warm enough that you are not distracted by a chill. Think of water in a float tank held at around 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, where skin and liquid are hard to tell apart. You will notice after the first novelty breaks that your mind wants to generate and organize. It pulls a shape from a smear of red, a word from a hiss, and then another. And soon you have a loose, half-dream narrative. It is not theatrical. It is the brain doing its old job of predicting and confirming, but with the world cooperating only at a distance. There are quieter footnotes worth holding. A few teams removed the sender entirely and told the person in the chair to notice without any suggestion that someone else was involved. Reported imagery still came, as strange and varied as before. The judging phase still produced slightly better than chance picks in some series, which hints at the power of suggestion and matching more than a signal pushed from one room to another. Other groups tested whether the success rate changed if the target was a moving clip instead of a still image. Moving targets seemed to help, perhaps because a stream of impressions is easier to match to something dynamic. Some found that meditation before the session primed the mind to settle into useful quiet faster, which is less a surprise than a reminder that attention is trainable. It belongs near the end, not the front, to say that the grander claim, information beyond the known senses, remains disputed. Reviews reach different conclusions depending on how they weigh older studies against newer runs, and how strictly they set their filters. One thing does survive those adjustments: the Ganzfeld setting, as an instrument to stir perception into speaking out loud, works. The room produces experience. Whether it does more than that is a question that still sits on careful tables in careful rooms. If you picture it now, the scene is very simple. A quiet lamp, the soft shine across two curved bits of plastic, a chair at an easy angle, a notebook open to the side where someone will later sketch a few words. Red marble, waterfall, far horn. down the corridor, a person studying a single image as if attention alone could carry weight. Then the short walk back, the set of 4 choices, the finger resting on one for a second longer than the others. It is not a miracle factory. It is a little theater where the brain shows how it handles silence and sameness, and where, now and then, choices climb a notch above chance and make people wonder. Think of the last moments before sleep, when the day has flattened to a murmur, and your eyes, half closed, turn darkness into slow-moving color. The Ganzfeld effect is that threshold stretched and held steady. Whether it invites whispers from beyond the 5 senses, or simply reveals how much we supply to our own perception, it leaves the same final picture: a human mind, patient in a red-lit room, listening hard to what rises when the world goes quiet. A dim room, a quiet hum from a slide projector, and a single bright dot fixed at the center of a screen. A researcher whispers, "Look here," and a shape blinks to life for a heartbeat on one side of the dot. A right hand rises to answer, the mouth says nothing. Then, presented on the opposite side, a second shape. The left hand answers, and the voice replies with ease. In that small difference, a door opened. This is the split brain experiments, 2 minds, 1 person. The story begins with a problem as old as medicine and as blunt as lightning. Seizures that seized a life, sometimes many times a day. In the years after the Second World War, certain hospitals on the west coast of the United States became centers for treating the most severe cases. Drugs often failed. Families arrived with a person who could not work or drive or sometimes even hold a conversation without the world tilting. Surgeons considered an unusual path. Between the 2 halves of the brain runs a thick bridge of fibers, millions of tiny wires carrying messages back and forth. The thought was simple if stark. Cut the bridge, so a storm in one half cannot ignite the other. In the early 1960s, a small number of patients agreed. The operations were careful and designed to protect as much function as possible. When the patients woke, something remarkable happened. The overwhelming seizures were greatly reduced, sometimes stopped. They could speak, recognize, remember past events, and laugh at jokes. They were themselves. The bridge was gone, but the person remained. That might have been the end of the story, a chapter in surgical history. But a team of researchers in nearby Pasadena, including a careful senior scientist and a young colleague who loved puzzles, saw a rare chance to ask a hard question. How do the 2 halves of the brain share a mind? They set up a small room with a chair, a screen, and a device that could flash an image for a fraction of a second. The arrangement mattered. The eyes were fixed on a central point. A picture shown briefly to the right of that point goes first to the left half of the brain. A picture shown to the left goes first to the right half. In most right-handed people, speech lives mostly in the left half. The hands also split duties. The right hand draws its orders from the left half, the left hand from the right. With those plain facts in place, the tests began. A simple word, spoon, was flashed for an instant to the left side of the screen. The person stared, calm. What did you see? The researcher asked. Nothing, the person said. The same word was then flashed to the right side. Spoon, the person answered immediately. After a short pause, the researcher slid a shallow box of objects toward the patient. With your left hand, the instruction came, reach in and pick up what you saw first. The left hand felt around for a moment, then calmly lifted a spoon. The person looked puzzled, and when asked why, they shrugged. Their right hand had not been told what their left hand knew. Out of such small scenes grew a pattern that still challenges how we talk about selfhood. One afternoon, a researcher paired two images. On the right side of the screen, a chicken's claw. On the left side, a winter yard under snow. In front of the patient sat a selection of pictures. With the right hand, guided by the left half of the brain that had seen the chicken claw, the person pointed to a chicken. With the left hand, guided by the right half that had seen the snow scene, the person pointed to a shovel. Then came the quiet moment that made the experiment famous. Why did you pick those? The researcher asked. The person glanced at the chicken and said, because it goes with the chicken claw. Then they glanced at the shovel, thought for a second, and said, you need a shovel to clean out the chicken coop. A tidy story, delivered by the speaking half, stitched two choices into a single explanation. It seemed that when the left half did not know why the left hand had acted, it made a reason that would make sense. There were other demonstrations. Show a simple instruction. Walk to the left side of the screen, and the person would stand up and start toward the door. When asked why, they might say, I was going to get a drink, or I needed to stretch. Place a set of colored blocks on the table and ask for a pattern to be recreated. The left hand, obeying the right half, would arrange blocks quickly and correctly. The right hand, under the speaking half's control, fumbled. Ask the person to draw with each hand. The left hand often drew a cube or a house with crisp depth and angles, the right hand softer and less accurate. If letters were laid out on cards, the left hand could sometimes spell answers to questions the mouth could not give. When shown a face that had one person's left half and another person's right half, the left hand would point to the person whose face was on the left. The voice would name the person on the right. Now and then, especially in the weeks after surgery, the hands seemed to disagree openly. One patient reached out with the left hand to pull a shirt off, while the right hand tried to button it. Another went to retrieve something with the left hand, while the right hand pushed it away. These tug-of-war moments made good stories. But over time, patients adapted. The two sides learned habits that steered conflict away. In daily life, they shopped, drove with caution, and held conversations like anyone else. The split revealed itself mostly in the artificial constraints of the lab. Center point, brief flashes, one side at a time. In the open world, the eyes move, the head turns, the body acts as one, and the two halves read the same scene together. Over the years, the experiments deepened. The team took care to avoid hints, using brief exposures and different hands to answer different questions. They gathered consistent results across several people, varying the tasks, the images, the placement of objects. Patterns held. The right half, though quieter in words, seemed adept at faces, music, and spatial puzzles. It understood simple language fine when questions were shown to its side of the screen. It could follow commands and respond with left-hand choices. The left half, home to speech for most people, often filled gaps with story fragments that made unpredictable acts seem planned. Then came the part that keeps the conversation alive. What does this mean for the self? One view says that cutting the bridge produces, in effect, two minds that share a body. There is support in the way the hands act independently under strict test conditions, and in the way only one half can speak for itself. Another view says the person remains one, with a single conscious field that the lab setup temporarily fragments. This view notes that the surgeries sometimes left small side roads intact, smaller connections between the halves that were not part of the main bridge. It also points out that the halves share one body and one environment. They can signal each other with little movements, a breath, a pause, a turn of the head. This cross-cueing, as some call it, can be so subtle that even the person does not notice they are sending themselves hints. More recent work added another twist. Decades after the first operations, a pair of patients whose bridges had been fully cut returned for new tests designed to look for everyday unities rather than clever splits. In some tasks that required a single perception to guide the whole body, the patients behaved as if the halves still shared enough to function as one. The sample was small. The tasks were different, but the results nudged the field to reconsider strong claims. Perhaps the two halves can act as two under highly controlled split-screen conditions and as one under more natural scenes. The unity we feel might be robust in the world we live in and fragile in a lab built to pry the halves apart. There were quieter counterpoints, too. Some surgeries did not remove every strand. Some patients had unusual patterns of language to begin with, placing words more to the right than usual. And the speaking half has a habit of confident narration. It is easy to conflate fluent explanation with real insight. When the left half is asked, "Why did your left hand do that?" it may give an answer that feels like knowledge, but is really a guess dressed in grammar. That tendency exists in all of us. The experiments just make it easier to see. If you were to build a chain of events that fits most of the facts without reaching for the grandest claims, it might look like this. The surgery reduces the storms that sweep both halves, and by doing so, gives a person back their days. The thick bridge is cut so fast, automatic sharing of information no longer happens. Each half remains a skilled specialist. One handles language and narrative. The other handles shapes, faces, and a kind of quiet knowing. In daily life, eyes and ears bring both halves the same stream, and body habits allow small signals to pass. The person feels whole. In the lab, the researchers block that stream on purpose and ask each half a question separately. The halves answer from their strengths, and then, if pressed for a single explanation, the speaking half does what it always does. It tells a story that makes sense of the combined acts. Sometimes that story is right. Sometimes it is charmingly wrong. The mystery is not a haunting. It is an exposure of how the mind usually hides its seams. Some listeners may recall that over time, writers have framed the split brain cases as proof of two separate selves. Others went the other way and argued there is only one. The reality that emerges from the careful notes is neither slogan. The person after surgery is not two people any more than a person without surgery is a single, indivisible point. A better picture is of a partnership with a fast radio link cut, now relying on slower, richer channels, sight, sound, touch, posture, and on a shared world. When that shared world is constrained and partitioned, the partners can surprise each other. When the world flows freely, they move together. It is worth saying gently that the strongest claims have been challenged. Later investigators, using different designs and modern tools, have questioned whether the early tests prove two independent consciousnesses beyond doubt. Some results leaned on small groups. Some relied on interpretations that, while plausible, were not the only ones available. That does not erase the careful work of those first decades. It places it in a line of inquiry that continues, quieter now, but still curious. Picture the scene one last time. A patient sits comfortably, chin level, eyes on a point of light. An image flickers on the left, a snowdrift beside a barn. The left hand moves without fuss toward the picture of a shovel. A second image flickers on the right, a bright chicken's claw. The right hand points to a chicken. The person smiles, a little sheepish, when asked to tie the two together. They do what all of us do. They tell a story about themselves that fits what their hands have done. Two halves joined by a life lived in one body. Learn to carry on after a necessary cut. In a room built to tease them apart, they show their different talents. Outside that room, walking into daylight, they merge into a single gate, a single set of eyes scanning a single street. The split brain experiments left us with a calm, enduring question. How much of our unity is built from pieces cooperating well, and how much is a signal that we do not yet know how to measure? The projector is quiet now. The chair sits empty. The dot of light fades, and the ordinary world, full of shared things to look at, comes back into view. Some mysteries don't hide in shadowed rooms or distant skies. They sit on a workbench, on a wooden floor, spinning in plain sight, promising something the world has never had: motion without end. Tonight's story is the perpetual motion dreams, machines that almost worked. For centuries, makers and mathematicians have chased the same idea: a wheel that never slows, a magnet that does more work than you feed it, a clever arrangement of weights that defeats drag and time. The words shift with the years: self-moving, overbalanced, free energy, but the shape stays the same: a device that starts and simply keeps going. The chase reaches back to medieval sketches. In the 13th century, a French draftsman drew a wheel rim studded with hinged weights, each meant to fall outward and pull the rim forward forever. In southern India, a mathematician sketched curved spokes filled with liquid metal, hoping the flow would unbalance the wheel and keep it turning. The principle sounds reasonable across a table. In practice, The outward weights on one side are balanced by inward weights on the other. The liquid that falls must be lifted again, and friction takes its quiet fee from every moving part. Yet drawings became prototypes, and prototypes became public showings, and sometimes, just often enough to keep the dream alive, someone built a machine that looked as if it had won. Early 18th century Germany. A craftsman named Johann Ernst Elias Bessler, who signed his work Orpheus, set a wooden wheel on its stand in the town of Mersburg and invited the curious inside. The wheel was large, roughly the height of a person, narrow across its width, clad in canvas so no one could see inside. When freed, it spun with a low, steady thump, as though weights were shifting within. It could lift a small load on a rope. It could turn for hours. Bessler moved his demonstrations from town to town, and the crowds grew. By the time he set up at a palace outside Castle, he seemed to know what onlookers wanted. Proof that no hidden hand drove it. A room was chosen. The wheel was set in place. The door was sealed with wax and an emblem pressed into it. Men outside took shifts watching. After weeks, the room was opened. The wheel was still turning. The Landgrave, a regional prince with a careful mind for engineering, endorsed the performance. The story hardened into something close to legend. It is still told as a high watermark, the wheel that did not stop. In his notes, one visitor mentions the sound of impacts inside, soft weight against wood, again and again, like a heartbeat. Another tried to slow the rim with his hand and felt it press back with unexpected force. Bessler said the arrangement of the inner parts was simple, but would not let anyone look. He demanded a fortune for the secret and offered to sell it sealed. Potential buyers balked. Critics called it a trick. In anger and disappointment, Bessler destroyed his own machines. He died decades later after falling from a windmill he was building, and took whatever he knew with him. What exactly had people witnessed? A weight-shifting wheel will not run forever without help, but it can store energy and trick the eye for longer than seems likely. Springs can hide inside the rim. A helper can turn a shaft through a wall for a time, especially when a demonstration space is of the showman's choosing. A wheel that keeps turning after a sealed test might have been given a slow push through a hidden fitment in a supporting pillar, with seals disturbed and then perfectly pressed again. And yet, the involvement of a prince who risked his reputation and a months-long trial in a guarded room give pause, even now. The case has the right mix of formality and doubt that allows it to endure. A century later, a different machine offered the public a gentler kind of wonder. In London, a master clockmaker built a timepiece that wound itself using slow changes in the air. The device was housed under glass and labeled perpetual, and the word was honest to the feeling it created. There is no flame, no key, only a breath of air trapped in metal and glass. As warmth rises in the day and falls at night, the sealed chamber expands and contracts. That motion nudges a pawl, nudges a ratchet, and winds the mainspring in tiny steps. If you stood in the hall long enough, you could see the second hand slide forward and understand plainly that the clock drank power from its surroundings. A similar principle lives on in the Atmos clock, a mid-century device whose sealed bellows will power it for days with a change of 1 degree Celsius or roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Not perpetual, but close enough to feel like a secret shared between the room and the machine. The urge to witness motion without end took on a scientific face in the 19th century. Designs appeared in newspapers and patents. A French scientific body grew so tired of submissions that in the 1770s, the urge to witness motion without end took on a scientific face in the 19th century. Designs appeared in newspapers and patents. A French scientific body grew so tired of submissions that in the 1770s, it announced it would no longer review proposals that tried to square the circle or run forever. In the United States, the Patent Office later adopted a rule. If you claimed perpetual motion, you had to bring a working model, and it had to operate in front of an examiner for as long as the office chose to watch. The practical message was clear. Show, do not just tell. Some showings delivered what they promised, though the explanation turned out to be humbler than the claim. In a university hallway in Dunedin, New Zealand, an antique clock built in the 1860s has been running on the daily flex of temperature and air pressure for more than a century, pausing during repairs or when the building is too stable to feed it. In an Oxford laboratory, 2 tiny bells have been ringing at a slow, regular pace since the 1840s, powered by stacks of dry cells called piles, sealed in wax. A battery chemistry so slow and frugal that no one quite wants to break it open to learn the exact recipe. If you listen in the quiet of that corridor, the strikes come like faraway footsteps, faint, steady, stubborn. They are not perpetual motion, but they refuse to be ordinary. The 20th century added electricity and magnets to the dream. In the years after the war, a soft-spoken inventor invited visitors to a basement to see a device that seemed to push forward on its own. The table would creep across the floor when the gadget was switched on, as if thrust lay within. When the show was repeated, with the device suspended by cords, the motion died. The floor had been the quiet partner. Static friction gave the illusion of a new force. A simple change of setup pulled the trick apart without cruelty. A few decades later, a Mississippi tinkerer toured the country with a copper-wound motor and a heavy permanent magnet, declaring that his machine drew energy from a field that others had overlooked. He courted the press. He drove from town to town with the device in the bed of his truck and let local reporters spin it up. The United States Patent Office listened to his pitch and, because of the claim, asked for an independent test. A government laboratory placed the motor under instruments and measured input and output carefully. The numbers were not kind to the claim. There was less energy coming out than going in. The patent was denied. The motor still ran, and it looked impressive, and people continued to believe. The dream held. Why do these machines keep appearing? And why do some almost work? Part of the answer is in the word almost. The world is full of small, steady energy flows. Warmth moves to cool. Air masses tip and settle. A watch can sip that change through a sealed bellows and keep time for years. A pair of ringing bells can feed on a carefully preserved pile of dry cells and carry on through generations. These are not violations of nature. They are its minor victories, built by clever hands to take a little power from the background and turn it into gentle motion. Another part is in our senses. A wheel that has stored energy can run for hours before it shows any sign of slowing. A rope over a pulley hides a helper around a corner. Seals on a door tell a reassuring story, but do not secure a room from a craftsman who set it up. When a demonstration is persuasive, the mind ties a bow on it. The line between long-running and never-ending blurs. There are also the misunderstandings that ride along with electricity and magnetism. A magnet feels like it does work merely by holding paper to a refrigerator. It does not consume itself to do that. It simply reshapes the forces between things. A meter can be misread, wires can be swapped, and a loud, spinning motor makes it difficult to believe that the number saying less out than in could possibly be true. Yet, when the meters are calibrated and the tests are quiet, the same conclusion returns. There is no new energy source inside the machine. That leaves us with the famous cases and their gaps. Take Bessler's wheel and ask what we can say without guessing. It existed. Many saw it. It could turn for long stretches and do small work, like lifting a light load. It made the sound of internal impacts. It had versions that spun only one way, and later versions that could be started in either direction, a detail that suggests two similar mechanisms joined together. The builder refused to open it to inspection and demanded a fortune for the secret. He was backed by a prince for a time, and then fell out with buyers and skeptics alike. The machine was destroyed by its maker, and no one rebuilt it to the same standard. If you trace a chain of events from those points, you arrive at ordinary mechanisms and ordinary trickery rather than a new physics. But the locked room and the prince's seal are facts too, and the story of them gives the wheel a life beyond its wood and canvas. That is why it returns to us in books and arguments, turning even now. There is one more quieter point that engineers bring up when the topic turns to endless motion. If someone truly had it, a compact, harmless source of constant power, it would seep into everything. Pumps, ships, heaters, even kitchen tools would change shape to hold it. Instead, what we see again and again are devices that require a careful stage, a sympathetic audience, and a narrative. That does not make the dream foolish. It makes it human. If you prefer a single thread to hold, it might be this one. People built devices that turned long and smoothly because they learned to sip from small streams of energy. The slow breathing of the air, the patience of a chemical stack, the friction under a table leg, the hand that pushed for a minute and left the wheel to run on stored momentum. A few wrapped those sips in a mystery because mystery kept the lights on and the tickets sold. Others truly believed they had found a door in the wall and invited the world to look. In the end, the wall remained. But the looking taught us things we kept: better bearings, better clocks, better tests. Somewhere tonight, a laboratory corridor is empty except for a glass case with two bells and a tiny clapper between them. The air is still. The floor is cool. Every few seconds, the clapper taps, left, right, left, an almost inaudible metronome that has kept time with passing lives. Not perpetual, just stubborn, and close enough to feel, for a moment, like the promise was kept. The strangest mysteries are the ones that think back. Memories shift, illusions breathe, and the brain tells stories so convincing that even truth can't interrupt them. Through all of it, from shared false memories to phantom companions and self-healing lies, one thing stays clear: the human mind isn't a machine for certainty. It's an artist, endlessly improvising. So as the night grows quiet, let the noise of thought drift. Let the unanswered questions stay open, because they belong there. And when sleep finally takes over, the mind will keep doing what it does best: dreaming new mysteries into being. As you settle deeper into rest, let the questions drift too, not for solving, but for holding softly, like stones at the bottom of a river. Tomorrow they will still be there, waiting. But for now, the mysteries can keep watch, and you can let go. Good night, and thanks for letting me keep you company.